how this got started was Susan said, is there anything you want to impart to leadership before you leave that you think, kind of keys to being successful as a leader? And I thought, well, yeah, there's probably a few things. And I sat down, I started writing things down, and pretty soon I had a full page of things, and I said, oh, wow. And I've only got how many months? So we thought about doing some brown bag lunches. If you get value out of this, keep coming. If you don't get value out of this, don't keep coming. If only 2 or 3 people show up, I'll still do it. The reason I'm videotaping it is really for my benefit, because for the longest time I've asked myself to write it down, but I'm not a writer. So by filming it, I can watch the film and write it down. Because when I sit down to write, there's nothing that happens. It doesn't go from my head to my hand. So it does go from my head to my mouth. So I'm just going to capture it with this to be able to have that. What I did was I gave the whole list to Susan, and I said, okay, let's just do this every month, and I'll let you pick the 3 subjects. So she's picking the subjects off that list, either by some magical way or what she thinks people might be most interested in, or at random. So the 3 subjects that she picked today was know what you believe, have a vision of the future, and how to work with intuitive versus serial thinkers. Now, we may not get through all 3 of those today, but we'll go as far as we can in the time that we have allotted. And I'll tell you kind of what each of those subjects mean and why I think it's important that you do those things as a leader. When I came to SwiftPack almost 13 years ago, one of the concerns I had was the management team didn't really know me. I was coming from Sunnyvale, and nobody knew who I was. And typically what happens is you get a new boss, and it takes you a year to figure out who they are and what they believe and what's important to them. And you spend all of this time, milling around trying to figure out your boss. So I thought, well, maybe it would be helpful if I wrote down kind of what I believe, because what I believe affects how I manage, and affects how I react, and affects kind of what my emphases are and where I'm headed. So it kind of shortened the figure out the boss span. The other thing it did for me is every couple of years I would pull the list out and say, do I still believe this? And I'd go down the list. I actually made changes. So that says the things you believe change as well. The other thing I did was I handed it to Susan after I had been here, I think, like 4 years. And I said, read this list. Tell me, do my actions follow what I say I believe? Because you can say you believe something, but if you continually act the opposite to that belief, then maybe you don't really believe that. And you need to come to terms with what you believe. And I think what you believe makes a difference in how you deal with people, what you say, what you do. And of course, one of the most radical things that hit the management team at that time was I loved email. Because there was only 4 computers here, and nobody was on email. So for them, it was a huge revolution. Oh my God, we're going to have to learn email. And so that ended up being one of the biggest cultural changes at SwiftPack, I think, when I first got here, was the whole using of email and things like that. So I think it's beneficial for you to sit down, write down what you believe. You can see some of the things I put down. Safety's number 1. Supporting the fleet, no empty tubes, having good missiles, making the customer, FBM, SMP, LM a success. Open and honest communications. That's something I emphasize at every new employee orientation, is that I expect them to ask questions and hopefully get open and honest answers to those questions. And ethical behavior. But you can go down there and you can see the things I think I believe. Now, you may go down the list and say, well, I don't think she really believes that because she doesn't behave that way. And feel free to give me that feedback. If you go down this list and you say, gee, you don't do that. Like you don't empower employees, or I doubt you can have any contesting with the having fun part. But anyway, the other is communicating what you don't believe. And I think one of the biggest things is doing something dumb just because I thought of it. I think the team here is wonderful because I'll say, well, I think we ought to do A. And they won't say anything. I'll say, well, anybody here think we ought to do A? And they, like, none raise their hand. So they totally feel free to tell me that was really not a good idea, Carol. And as a manager, you'll find one of the biggest traps you get into is people not telling you. You know, and just going and doing what you said, even though it's not smart. So developing a relationship with your people where they can express disagreement, or they can say, well, maybe that's not quite on the mark. You might want to try something else. That is the most valuable thing I think that I've had in my career, is having a team of people that don't let me go do something stupid. Whether that feedback comes from safety, whether that feedback comes from HR, whether it comes from leaders, or whether it even comes from an hourly person on the floor who calls me and says, this is really stupid, why are you doing this? And I say, why am I doing what? And they'll tell me what stupid thing it is I'm doing, and I'm saying, well, okay, if that's what we're doing, that wasn't what we meant to do. So the whole idea of being able to develop a relationship with your folks where you can have those exchanges of information will keep you out of trouble. It will help you make better decisions, and it will get your team to engage, and you'll get much better results. And I think one of the reasons SwiftPack has been so successful here is because it wasn't Carol SwiftPack. It was the team here, and I recognize it. It was the team here. But my contribution was being willing to be open and being willing to listen and being willing to let people disagree with me. I love disagreement. I think it's fun. And when you react to it that way, I think it energizes your people versus being defensive and, you know, not wanting to hear it. And so I think that's really smart. Micromanaging, doing it all yourself, that is the number one trap. Number one trap. And typically, you normally come out of a job where you're an individual contributor and you are an absolutely outstanding performer, and so they decide to put you in leadership, and what is your inclination? To do everything yourself. Because then you know it gets done right, it gets done on time, and it's exactly what it needs to be. The problem is then it makes you a lousy leader. Because as a leader, if you're not developing your people and teaching them what to do, you aren't doing your job. I had a brand new leader that came to see me after they'd been in their job for about 6 months and said, gee, Carol, I'd really like to meet with you and get some feedback. Oh, okay. Okay, well, how about Friday? Okay, I'll come see you Friday. So the person came to see me on a Friday, and I said, well, I think you're doing a lousy job. That person just about fell on the floor and their jaw just about hit the table because they just weren't expecting that. They were expecting me to say, you're doing a great job. Maybe you could tweak this or that. I said, no, you're doing all the work yourself. You know what? All the work coming out of your organization is fabulous. But you're flunking as a manager because all that is coming out of you. And that doesn't do me any good if it's coming out of you. It needs to be coming out of your people. You need to be teaching them. You need to be growing them. They need to be learning what needs to be done and how to do it properly. So your number one job is teaching, coaching, delegating, not doing. You're not a doer anymore. And the more you do, the more damage you do to your team. So, and these are my opinions. You're welcome to take them or not take them. I know from my experience. I had a vice president give me advice one time, and at the end of giving me advice, he says, well, yeah, but Carol, I know you. You probably are not going to take my advice. And he was right. So just because I say it doesn't mean you got to do anything with it. It's just my view. And I've learned you want to pick up the gems as you go along from all the people. I am who I am from working with 100 different managers in my career. And so as you go on your career and as you move along, you take these really two good nuggets from this person, you take these really two good nuggets from this person. That's what makes you the best leader, is taking the best of the best and learning from them. So another one that's helped me be successful is I don't believe in giving up easily. The saying my staff has is, Carol doesn't take no for an answer, she just assumes it means no, not right now. And I have found persistence, especially if what you're doing is right, If you persist, it may take years, but you can affect change. You can. I had a director of HR standing in front of me about this close, very hot and heated, and yelled at me and said, "What is it you don't understand about no?" I said, "The stupid part." So I encourage you, don't give up easily. In fact, that was on my second grade report card. So I think I've been doing that for a while. It says, Carol never gives up. So I think that is another thing, is don't assume just because the rules say A, B, C today that you can't get them changed to D, E, F in the future. Change is very slow. This company changes very slowly, but you can affect it. You can make a difference just by persisting and continuing to push in a direction that you think things ought to go. So, and the next one is making work is not necessary. One of the worst things managers do, one of the worst things, especially the higher up they get, is they ask for lots of information. You can create so much work for your group and your team because you want them to feed you lots of information. They end up doing a lot of work. One of the things I found in my career is if you can find a way to get the information that doesn't create a lot of work, try to get the information that way. The other is, if you want to status something, the best way to status something to closure is to motivate people to close it. So let me give you one technique. I'll say to the managers, gee, we're kind of running behind on CI. Next month, I'm going to start weekly status meetings on Monday at 6 a.m. on your CI projects. So we'll see if you're not done. If you're done, you don't need to come to the meeting. Okay? Because you're done. If you're not done, then let's get together 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday and discuss it. Usually there's one, but the rest of them are done. So how much work did I have to do managing those to closure? Now, if I'd have just kicked it in and said, okay, we're going to start statusing this next week, and let's all just status it to death. And then we'd have status meetings every week, and we'd waste an hour every week statusing instead of working on it. So ask yourself, is statusing really what you want, or is it closure? And if it's closure, what's the best way to get it closed? One of the things we do, for example, when it's PRS time, and we got to do a lot of PRS stuff, is we do a no meeting week. I'll say, okay, managers, what week do you want me to cancel all the meetings so you can work on your PRSs? Do you think this place will run if we don't have a meeting 1 week out of the year? It will. I found that out. It's amazing. But it gave the managers time to do the PRSs, to meet with their people, to talk with them, to be able to do what they need to do. So you have to ask yourself, how can I make sure I make time for my people to get the job done? And what can I do to keep from causing them to do so much work in just statusing the fact they're not done, that they don't get done? So think about, how you might be able to get, information in other ways. Let me give you another example. Okay? I like to kind of get a feel for how many safety improvements we do in a year. Okay? So here's 2 ways you could do it. You can say, okay, every month I want a manager to turn in a report and tell me what safety improvements they're going to have. So they have to stop and go ask other people and status it and write it all down. Or I can say, gee, I've got these gift certificates in my drawer. If one of your folks makes a safety improvement, I'll give them a certificate. They show up, they get the certificate, they leave, I write it down, I have the status. Who had to do the work? Nobody. The information's been transmitted. Now, if they're not getting their people rewarded, I'll say, gee, your people haven't got any certificates for a while. Oh, well, we had this really great idea last week. I said, well, you need to come see me. Then they come see me. So I'm getting the information. So ask yourself, what is the best way for me to get the information? Is it writing a report? Is it doing all of this work? Is it creating... Swiftland Management does a 4-hour every week set of presentations that have to be done by every senior manager. And they do a horrendous amount of work. They probably spend 2 days putting all the charts together for their once-a-month presentation. Okay, what value are you getting? You should be getting some value out of the information. If you're not, you're just giving them busy work. So that's what I mean by, be careful. It's really easy to create busy work and you don't even know you're doing it. And the other is, you can create busy work by creating a lot of meetings. The other thing I learned was, in Sunnyvale, you just made meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. So one of the things that I did in my life is I said, gee, I'm going to stop doing that. So instead, senior managers have 2 meetings a week. Monday at 1, Thursday at 1. Thursday at 1, just the senior managers come in case we have any personnel issues to discuss, employee development to discuss. Monday is open to all subjects. So twice a week we meet. All the subjects are brought to those 2 meetings. Now if there's a panic, maybe we'll have another meeting. But for the most part, it either gets deferred to Thursday or get deferred to Monday. Now, what I could have done instead is take every subject that's in the SMILE meeting or take every subject that's in the staff meeting and schedule an hour meeting. And we could have 16 hours of meetings a week instead. So ask yourself, what's the value of the meeting? What are you getting out of it? Are you really getting what you're trying to get out of the meeting? And so there's other ways to skin the cat. The other is blaming versus finding root cause. I think we've had that subject about beat to death. Most of the people in here have been to the root cause class. But the whole idea of, not trying to find blame, but really trying to find out what really caused the problem and trying to fix it. So, does anybody have any of the what I believe in items that you'd like me to talk about? I thought it was more important actually to talk about the things I don't believe in, because I think those are more harmful than others, but
when you were talking about delegating and leading your people or training your people, you do have to know what they do and look at what they do and guide them, though, don't you?
Absolutely. It's important to learn what each of your people do. When you get a new job, try to learn everything you can about what your people do. Watch all the training videos that they watch. As many of the classes they go to, you need to go to. Because the more you know about what they do, the better decisions you can make and the better questions you can ask when different situations come up. And the better you can delegate to. So.
The one that caught my eye was open and honest communication. I certainly believe that you believe in that. My concern / comment is, since you're the boss, do you think that you give filtered communication? And do you take that into consideration? I mean, I believe when you communicate, you are open and honest to the point that you can be, recognizing that you can't always be totally open and honest because of other factors. But in our approaching you, there's always the, hey, we're talking to the resident director here. So.
Well, I think positional authority always gives people trepidation. And over time, you can either establish trust where they believe they can tell you what's really going on, or you'll establish an artificial fear where they do believe they have to filter it. Some people, it's very, very difficult to get them to trust you and for them to overcome the fear. And you have to just keep working that continuously your whole career with every one of your direct reports that comes to see you, with all the people that work for you. And it's real interesting what you find out at Home Depot and Costco.
When you're away from work, you get happy.
Because I get, hourly people and salary people and all kinds of people who normally wouldn't have access to me. We run into each other at Costco, and they usually tell me whatever their pet peeve is. Now, I don't come back and say, hey, your person talked to me about that. What I do is I have that information. As time goes on, eventually that issue comes up, and I'll say, well, gee, what are you thinking about? Where are you going? And I try to influence the outcome. And that also helps establish the trust, because I didn't come in and say, hey, your person said this, and it gets back to that person, and they'll say, well, next time I see her at Home Depot, I'm going down the other aisle. So it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to eliminate the fear so that you can have open and honest communication. Good news and bad news. But yes, there are some people you do have to filter the information to. I have to be careful sometimes how I present the data to people in Sunnyvale, because you got to understand, well, how are they going to react to the data? How are they going to see the data? How can you get them to listen long enough so that they get enough information to make a good decision rather than reacting up front and making a stupid decision? So that whole trust communication thing is very, very hard.
So to go another step further on the open communication, we've had meetings, we've stressed communication, we've stressed being able to talk to anybody about pertinent subjects we need to. How far do you think we've come in meeting our goal to be a totally communicative group here? I mean, it seems to me like in a lot of instances we're not quite there yet. It seems like I should be able to talk to the hourly worker on a subject the same way I talk to you, and it seems like there's a lot of people that can't, and I'm not saying I can, but a lot of people that can't talk the same way to the same people, and it really can change. So, I mean, do you think we still have a long ways to go as a group? Do you think we're...
I think we're probably farther along than most sites,
Okay.
but I don't think you ever get there. For one thing, you get new people, and now you're starting over. You got to build trust. You got to build communication. I mean, how many new people do we have?
Yeah.
Half our workforce is new people. So you don't. It never ends. You constantly have to be working on communication, working on communication, working on communication. And when you think you're done, then you need to work on your communication, because it doesn't ever stop. You can never take for granted that the message you're trying to give is what is being received. You got to keep.
It seems like from the higher tiers and as you go down, we owe it to the people below us to provide the communication that we want from them too. If we don't set the good examples of that communication, it's not helping them either.
Right. I found you're better off telling everybody what really is going on, both upwardly and downwardly, so that you can all work on the problem together. What happens when you hold information is that you hurt one side or the other, or both, because the communication is not happening. I saw that a lot during the layoffs in Sunnyvale when we went from 30,000 people to 10,000 people. Talk about withholding information. It was horrible. Some of the groups in Sunnyvale would walk up to their employees on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock and say, "Don't come back Monday." Okay, well, I didn't do that. I said, okay, here's the seniority list. This year, we're probably going to lay off to this point, next year to this point, the next year to this point. People had a year to 3 years to know when they were going to get hit on the list. And they all planned. Some of them went back to school. Some of them got new jobs. Some of them had their spouses went back to work so that when they got laid off, they weren't without an income. If people get information, as scary as it is, it really does help. So good or bad, I think you need to share as much as you possibly can, unless the lawyer tells you, because sometimes the lucky lawyer says you can't share that. Or disciplinary information, you can't share that. There's some things you can't share because of legal obligations. But for the most part, there's not a lot you can't share.
What do you do about people that don't listen to what you're trying to share with them? And it's, in listening, what I'm saying is, you're trying to provide either pertinent information that will assist with the job being done right or better or easier, and you just can't seem to motivate them to hear what you're saying. I find that really frustrating.
The best way is to try to approach it in different ways of communicating. One of the things to watch and listen for is when you're working with someone is understanding how they receive information. If someone says to you a lot, "I hear what you're saying," or they say to you a lot, "Oh, I see what you mean," that usually tells you whether they're visual, auditory, in writing. Watch for what's the best way that person receives information. Is it reading a report? Is it verbally? Is it viewfoils, pictures? That will help. Just the style you use to communicate. The other is getting rid of the defensive so that they actually can hear you. The other is sometimes you can give people information and advice, and if they don't want it, they don't have to have it. And they will learn from their own mistakes. You know, I've had people come back to me and say, yeah, Carol, you told me not to do A. I did A because I thought that was the best thing to do, and it really messed things up, and I should have listened to you. Well, next time they listen a little better. So sometimes you have to let people make their own mistakes too. So you have to ask yourself, how important is it that this person get this communication? Or can they make a mistake as a result of not listening and learn from it? So the other part is understanding when is it you have to keep pushing it, because that could be a big mistake. Or, oh, I'll let them go their way and do their thing, and they'll come back later and realize, gee, they should have listened to what I said. So there's lots of communication ways of skinning the cat. Does that help?
Yeah, you have a lot more patience than I do.
It takes a lot of patience to be a leader.
I have one more question too. The one that also caught my eye was leaders are responsible to represent the company's position.
That is the most difficult thing.
That's what I wondered. Are there instances where clearly the way that you're wired just says that, boy, this is a hard pill?
There are times I'll be up all night long, totally, absolutely fuming over what the company is forcing me to tell people. Yes.
But at the end of the day,
But at the end of the
you're a
day,
good
I
soldier?
have to tell you what the company wants you to hear. You have to. And that's one of those things where you keep trying to affect the company. So that someday maybe they won't be saying the thing that's just absolutely got you totally. But yeah, there's been nights I've been awake all night long. Any other items on the list? Where are we at in time? It's 12. Why don't we go to intuitive versus serial thinkers, because that's probably a little shorter subject than the vision of the future, and we'll probably do the vision of the future at another session. But I went to a class, 23 years ago, and the class was actually understanding the differences between men and women, but it really more was on the subject of how intuitive thinkers think versus how serial thinkers think. It tends to be in a general fashion, most men, about 80%, tend to be wired to think serially, and 80% of women think intuitively. But you still have the 20% of women who think serially and the 20% of men who think intuitively. So I think it's more important to understand, what kind of person are you working with and how do they think? Because our brains tend to be wired two ways. One is where you have a lot of connections between the two hemispheres, and so the person thinks more intuitively. So you go to the meeting, they say, we have problem A. The intuitive thinker, all of a sudden all those synapses start firing. And they say, we should do Z over here. Okay? The serial thinker is wired a little differently. And so they'll say, okay, here's where I am. What would be the first thing I would do? What would be the second thing I would do? Well, can I diagnose it? Can I take a look at it? Can I take it apart? Can I put it back together? And they walk down the path of thinking about the issue and the subject and going from this position to Z. The problem is where your way of thinking is different than the people you're working with. Where I saw it a lot was where women who were working with engineers would go to the meeting and they would say, okay, we need to solve this issue. And the woman would say to herself, oh, well, we need to do Z. And they would say at the beginning of the meeting, well, we just need to do Z. Well, the serial thinkers would look at her and say, what planet are you on? We need to look at the problem. We need to analyze it. We need to discuss it. We need to look at different approaches. Then we'll come up with the answer. Well, it's just because the brains are different. And if you don't understand that, it can be very frustrating for you either way. Okay? if you understand it and you work with the groups of people you're in, the way they think and the way they make connections, it actually can help you. So if you're intuitive, you go into a meeting with a bunch of engineers, you keep your mouth shut. You know it's Z, that's great. It could be X, Y, or Z. You need to walk the path with them and discuss it and analyze it and take it apart and put it back together and come up with options and then decide you're going to do Z. Bear in mind some of the patience, okay? And that's okay. Okay. If you're the serial thinker and you have this person in your group, male or female, Tom Strid, for example, is intuitive, so he gets frustrated all the time. Look, the answer is Z. What's their problem? They don't understand it. The answer is Z. I'm like, Tom, you need to understand. This is how they think. You need to walk through it with them. Okay? And if you have an intuitive thinker, and they jump out in the front of the meeting and say, it's Z. Okay, what you say to them is, okay, Tom, it might be Z when we get done, but tell you what, why don't you walk down the path with us and let us examine it and take a look at it and look at our options. And if you don't think we get down the stream where you think we ought to be getting to, then you can keep giving us feedback. Okay? So what they used to do to me in Sunnyvale, my boss would say, Carol, are we there yet? I'd say, not yet, boss. Okay. Then keep going. Okay? But by understanding that these groups work differently, it will help you with your frustration. Whether you're one or the other, if you understand that you either got to walk through the process with them, or whether you can jump to the intuitive answer, it will really help you in the meetings and in the discussions, and because as leaders, you're going to get thrown into different kinds of subjects with different kinds of groups. You might get thrown into an HR issue, and you're in the room, and you're the only serial thinker, and everyone in there is intuitive. And that's like scary. Okay? Or the opposite, you go into the meeting and you're the only intuitive and everyone there is serial, and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, okay, the next hour will be writing it down. And it will help you. It really will. It really will help you. The other part is, if you know you're going to be presenting to serial thinkers, you can't go in and present them the problem and tell them the answer. Can you? No, it doesn't work. You're going to have to take them through the process. And that's why you design the presentation to say, here's the problem, here's the things we did, here's the 5 options, here's why we picked option 4. How many have seen those kind of presentations? Now you know why those presentations exist. And if you're an intuitive thinker, you're wondering, why did I have so many view foils just to tell them it was option 4. Option 4 is the absolute most obvious one. You don't even have to think about it. That's not true. Not for the group that you're presenting to. Okay. But if you're intuitive and the engineer comes up and they have 54 view foils, and you don't get to know the answer until page 54, it takes a lot of discipline to listen and help let them walk through the process and let them get you to page 54. But just understand that you're working with different kinds of people, and you got to be able to send and receive in the format that those people can send and receive in. Any questions on that? Some of you are like laughing and thinking, oh my God, that's what's been going on. But this will also help you with your spouse. This will also help you with your spouse. Because the other thing that happens for serial thinkers is that they cannot multitask. If your boss is a serial thinker, do not walk in their office and start talking to them if they're on the phone. They cannot hear you. They cannot interact. They have to stop the phone. Okay, what is it you need? Okay? The reason is they can't do both. If you're an intuitive thinker, you can do both. And you wonder why you can't be talking to your friend and talking to your husband at the same time. Not a problem. Okay? So those are some of the things that happen when you go into a serial mind and an intuitive mind, is the whole multitasking thing. You know? And so if you wonder, how come I can't multitask? Well, you know what? Some people are not wired to do that, and some people are. But be cautious. If you walk up and interrupt somebody who's a serial thinker, it's very frustrating for them. And they think you're out of your mind. Why are you interrupting me? I was just in this train of thought. I was just walking down the path. I'm like 3/4 of the way through, and now you're stopping me. Okay, we're going to stop this. Now what is it you want? Well, I just wanted to know what you wanted for lunch. Been there? Done that?
How do you get an intuitive thinker though to stay to a timeline?
It's extremely difficult.
Very hard.
Yes. Some of the things people do to me is they say, Carol, if I tell you the answer, will you listen to the story? And I'm like, okay, that's a good exchange. This is frustrating for me because I want to know, well, what's the answer? Just tell me the answer. No, I got to tell you the story. So if you have someone who's an intuitive thinker, you say, hey, if I give you the answer on page 52, could you allow me to walk through the process and show you how we got there? They're more likely to do it. The other is to explain to them that you have to go through this process and you got to trust the process, which is a lot of reasons why CI tools are so good. It's because it does force intuitive thinkers to use a process.
I guess I was thinking more along the line, how do you get a serial thinker to know that you have to move along quick enough so we can get to the answer in time that it doesn't hurt us?
You can't. The only way you can speed it up is by talking each step faster. You can't skip the step. If you skip the step, they aren't going to follow.
And then I guess it'd be interesting to know how many timelines are created by intuitive thinkers versus serial thinkers.
And that can be a problem.
Because I see that.
Are you giving everybody enough time to do the analysis?
Exactly.
Because the team you're giving the challenge to do the analysis is going to need the time.
Or the timeline that the customer has in mind is different than what your serial thinkers can actually accomplish.
Right?
And then how does the company advertise correctly what they can reasonably accomplish?
And you as a leader need to watch your team and over time understand how long does it take them to do the process, so that when you commit to a date, you can take that into account. Or you have several people on your team that can play, and you say, I only have 3 days, I'm going to give the assignment to Sue. That's what's so important about having a mixed team of people and having some serial thinkers and some intuitive thinkers, is because sometimes I have to call up Tom Strid and say, Tom, problem, tell me what I need to do. The next phone call is, Barry, we need to figure out how we're going to do A. Can you give me a preliminary schedule by next month? So understanding your team helps too. Because sometimes you aren't given a month. So if you have those intuitive thinkers, you can get down the path a lot faster, more safely than forcing serial thinkers to jump to the end. Can you just guess? Guess? What do you mean guess? I don't guess. Data. I need data. So, but I think understanding it really helps you. Not only your team members, but your coworkers. You know, Nancy and I were just laughing because we went to an offsite, and Karen was facilitating the offsite, and she randomly picked groups of 2 to put together this puzzle of the United States. Okay, so each team got the puzzle of the United States. Well, just by chance, Nancy and I got on the same team. So, okay, everybody open the box. So we opened the box, and without even talking to each other, we did the outside edges, and then we just stuffed everything in, and we were done. And then we looked around, and they were still turning the pieces over. We said, oh, okay. Now what do you want to do? Well, you know, we jumped to the solution and filled in the solution, where The other teams were thinking, okay, let's put all the blue pieces together and all the green pieces together and all the red pieces together, and then once we have all that together, then we can. Okay, now look for the words. Does it say Idaho on it, or does it say Montana on it? And they're spending all the time reading the pieces and sorting the pieces and organizing the pieces, and which is fine. They will get the puzzle together, but it really demonstrated to me just how the difference is in the mindsets.
Did it have anything to do with the sex? The men did the one.
Well, the reason it has to do with sex is because 80% of women are intuitive,
But
and
in that particular
80%
case,
and 80% of men are serial, but 20% of each group is the opposite. So you can't just say it's men or women, but generally you'll find most men to be serial thinkers.
I guess I meant to ask in that particular case, were you the only women?
We were the only women.
That's what I was asking.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think all but one of the men were serial thinkers.
So then when you throw in personalities, is it fair to say that a serial thinker can come across frustrating or even sometimes dense to an intuitive? And
Absolutely.
an intuitive can come across condescending,
Yes,
arrogant to a point
right.
to the serial thinker.
And reckless. You're reckless. You just jump out there with a solution. How can you do that? You're not thinking.
I mean, I was just wanting
You
to
could be wrong.
see if those were the right words.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how they see each other if you're not really thinking about, you know, how that person thinks or behaves or, you know. Is that,
Seems like all the systems that are set up, though, are serial systems. So there's sometimes.
for Lockheed Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah, who created the company?
Yeah.
Serial thinkers.
So we go through these
Not
processes.
just men. Be careful there, because you know what? In the first years of Lockheed, they hired women. What were they? Engineers. What were they? Serial thinkers.
But the point is, so we have all these serial processes.
Absolutely.
There's some obvious answers, and we use this serial system to validate answers that we already know.
Correct.
So that's kind of back to,
We gotta have a serial leaning event.
Yes. In order to make change at Lockheed Martin, because it is a serial thinker company, they have to use processes. That's why they like CI. That's why they like the programs that cause you to go through step-by-step processes.
well, they use the process to say, this answer's gotta be right, because we went through this process, and we looked at all these options.
Right. That's why they do KTAs. That's why they do,
CI and Kaizans and
that's why all that,
Lucas and Apollo and.
yes,
Where's the CO?
Yes.
All your J's.
yes. But like me and Susan, I said to her this morning, well, who would you pick for this? She goes, this person. I said, that's exactly what I thought.
You didn't have to go through a process? Shocking.
We didn't go write all the names down and do a thing and, you know, write them down and do a KTA and get all the numbers. Okay, we both agree it's this one. You know, so sometimes it's refreshing to work with someone that's like you. So if you're a serial thinker, it's just great to work with another serial thinker. It is just really fun for me and Ron. Okay! But it's fun, because we have to balance each other out, and I have to be patient and go through the spreadsheet. You know, and he reminds me, okay, Carol, we're gonna have to step through all of you foil. Okay, Ron, I got it. And I'll say to Ron, you're not there yet. So, once you understand it, though, then it's not as frustrating. Either between you and your spouse, or between your coworkers, or your boss, or whatever. It really does help you to put things in terms that that person's going to understand. You know, so if you're walking in there, you got a director that's intuitive, you walk in and you say, here's the answer, let me show you what we went through to get to that answer. It's just a different way of doing it. If you go in and it's a serial thinker, do not tell them the answer first, because then the whole time they'll be resisting the answer. You go in and you say, okay, we'd like to go through the process with you and show you what we came up with. And you go through the process and you show them what they came up with. So hopefully that tip helps you. I know it's helped a lot of women who work in engineering. Anyway. Any other questions, rather than going on to another subject?
Did that class talk about people that could be a little combination of both,
Yes.
depending on what the problem is?
Yes. Yeah, you can have a combination, somebody that's got a little bit of both.
I guess what I discovered is that typically the intuitive thinker has to adapt to the serial thinker.
Only if they're outnumbered.
I seldom see the serial thinker trying to adapt to the intuitive thinker.
That's because you work at Lockheed Martin. If you worked at Apple, that might not be the case. Or if you worked at an artistic company where everybody's a right brain thinker, you would find a different experience. But right now, you're in a serial thinking company with serial thinking processes. And just think about, we want to get to a level 3 CMMI. Do you know what they're saying?
No.
We'd like to put more detail in our procedures so that all the steps are there. Who's saying it? Our president, who has 2 what? Engineering degrees.
I think it must be all serial thinkers that are creating SIPs.
Absolutely. You know what an intuitive thinker would write in there? Just don't do anything stupid and get this result. What's wrong with, what's hard with that? So it's interesting.
It's also got to help Lockheed Martin in knowing our customer, and the
Uh-huh.
military, the government, and serial thinking.
Absolutely. Oh, yes,
But the
absolutely.
great leaders in government are not serial thinkers
Right.
necessarily.
Right. And what was interesting is I went to training as a promising person at a director level to become a VP, president of a company. The whole entire week was how to get you to think more intuitively. Because typically, at that level, you are not given all the information you need to make the decision. So you have to rely on your intuitive processes to be able to make decisions. So once you get past a certain point, the strong intuitive thinkers are actually going to do better. And the company recognized that, and how they've got this big gap between the people moving up and the people that then need to break that barrier and move to the next level. So one of their things was, you got to be able to make decisions not having all the information. And I remember I worked for this woman who was a serial thinker to the nth degree, and she wrote on my evaluation, "You don't get enough information to make decisions." So I said to her, "Have I ever made a wrong decision?" "Well, no, I think you've just been lucky."
Luck is in the intuition.
Huh?
Luck is in the intuition.
Yeah. So a lot of people see intuitive people as being lucky. They just guessed right. Huh?
That doesn't happen very often, not all the time. Yeah.
So it was kind of funny. But we were friends, still friends today. She's retired. She lives both in California and Idaho. And so, yeah, I've worked for real drastically left-brained women, which is kind of interesting. I think Joanne McGuire's that way. So I think if you ever go make a presentation to her, you'd want to make sure that you show her all the steps and here's the answer. Any other questions along those lines?
Will the company ever let an intuitive person head up the company and change the course? You think?
I think typically you see that happen when the company gets to the point where they've got some real serious issues and some real serious problems, and they need somebody to make rapid change. That's when you'll see people come in, take over a company, get hired as the CEO to effect change. I think you've seen that in some of the major corporations even over time. Will that ever happen for Lockheed Martin? Probably not.